And so without further ado, I want to introduce our amazing moderator today, Adonica Shaw, a former All Raised Bootcamp alum and founder and CEO of Women Wing Incorporation. She has been named as one of the top 136 Black innovators in STEM and arts by Wonder Women Tech. Adonica is the founder of a healthcare-focused social media platform, Wingwomen, and an international wellness advocate. Adonica is dedicated to cultivating digital spaces that inspire professional women to improve their mental health by dedicating themselves wholeheartedly to self-care. And what a better time to be thinking about self-care, especially in the last year or so, and we're still in the pandemic. So, thank you, Adonica, for joining us today, and I will give the mic over to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Today is quite a unique conversation because not only do I get to bring this much needed conversation to the All Raised community, but I have the pleasure of interviewing my own advisor. So today is going to be full of fun. And so as we dive in, I do want to actually do a formal bio of Mac, because I know for most people he's just known affectionately as Mac the VC on Twitter, but I assure you that there is much more to this man than the 140 characters that you see buzzing across your screen every couple of hours. And so with that, Mac is the founder and managing director of RareBreed Ventures, a pre-seed stage venture fund based in Baltimore, Maryland. RareBreed Ventures is investing in exceptional founders outside of the large tech ecosystems earlier than anyone else. With early, meaningful cash up front, wraparound services to increase capacity, and institutional knowledge from the addition of the executive, RareBreed Ventures accelerates a company's growth at its earliest stages. Now, before starting RareBreed, Mac worked at the Maryland Technology Development Corporation as a portfolio manager, where his role was to find, help make investment decisions on, and help build Maryland-based startups. He worked closely with many TEDCO portfolio companies to help them secure customers, partnerships, and funding. Now he uses his knowledge that he's gained in both public and private sectors as a software engineer as well, and CEO to help startups become successful. He's a Baltimore native, and he joined a co-op program with the Department of Defense in 2006 and obtained top secret security clearance. Don't want to do anything crazy around Mac, right? He went on to become a government contractor working in software development for several companies, including Northrop Grumman and Booz Allen Hamilton. So with that said, I would like to formally welcome Mac to the stage. And from there, we're going to start our conversation. Hi, Mac.
How's it going, Adonica? Hey, can y'all tell she's an on-air personality? Y'all can tell she does news, right? Just from the way she read that. That was amazing.
Thank you. I would love to, dive into the conversation, but I think particularly in terms of making this a meaningful conversation to the All Raised audience and to first-time founders or inexperienced founders, people working in tech, I think it's good to start the conversation by just defining a couple of words that we see floating around on social media, on websites and advertisements. Certainly when we're hearing underrepresented founders, or we invest in diversity and this, that, and the other, I think there needs to be more clarity around what that means for a firm, for a venture capitalist, for a founder. And so I do want to start off by getting your definition of 3 different words. And so for the audience, we're going to use those to frame the conversation for the rest of the hour. So first definition I would love to get your take on is, what does underrepresented mean to you?
So when we talk about underrepresented, we're typically within the frame of this conversation, we're talking about those individuals who we don't see being represented in the world of venture capital, and typically in the world of raising venture capital, right? The vast majority of venture capital is raised by white men. It's what it is, right? Well over like 90%, it's all white men, right? Or they're white men and a few other demographics, but generally speaking, right? And so we talk about underrepresented, we're talking about those individuals who typically aren't represented. And so, you have people of color, you have women just as a whole, right? You have people with disabilities, you have veterans, right? So typically when we're talking about underrepresented, those are the groups, and that's a very wide range and very broad range, which just tells you how narrow of a range venture capital actually invests in.
Thank you so much for that definition. And so I want to pivot to another one that also has a lot of gray area, because when I visited your website, it says, RareBreed invests in exceptional founders. And so when you say exceptional, I have to think in the world of startup, in order for somebody to be a founder, for lack of a better phrasing, like they've got to have some pretty big cojones, right? They already have to have some defining personality characteristics that make them exceptional, that make them want to show up in the world and solve very large problems for the masses. And so considering that people who are already stepping into that arena are essentially exceptional, as a venture capitalist, as a two-time founder, what does exceptional look like to you now?
It's different for every founder, but to your point, becoming a founder takes a lot of belief. It takes a lot of grit. It takes a lot of hard work. But that's kind of the baseline. Like all founders kind of hit those marks, right? Generally speaking. And so to be an exceptional founder, it's like, how do you channel all that grit and hard work into really good execution? And so exceptional founders are going to be those who are exceptional at executing, right? Because that's what it's going to take to build a great company, right? When you look at a company like Pipe, right? That company went from 0 to $2 billion valuation in like less than 2 years, right? But the founder was a very exceptional executor and found a large problem to work on right away. But part of that is they're also repeat founders, right? Like we see this with repeat founders, like your first rodeo, you're going to go through a bunch of ups and downs. You're going to take a bunch of lumps just because you just don't know what you don't know, right? But your second company, your third company, a lot of those initial things that you have issues with in the beginning, like just learning the jargon, like just talking about the terms we're talking about, or building your network and all those things, by the time you get to your next ones, it gets easier, right? That's not to say every exceptional founder is a repeat founder. It's not true. There's plenty of first-time founders that are great, but it's all about how well you execute. And that's something that's you've shown time and time again, I will say.
Oh, thank you. So I just have one more definition that I'd like us to define before moving forward into the conversation, and it is diversity. When you talk about diversity on Twitter, when you're talking about it on Clubhouse, in conversations just like this, what is it that you mean by diversity?
So diversity for me means everybody. That's actually what diversity means. Very often when we see people on stages or talking about diversity, they're very often using the word to talk about their own affinity group, which, that's fine. But I'd much rather, instead of people using the word diversity, just say what you mean. Just say like, hey, we're here to support women. We're here to support Black women. We're here to support Black people. We're here to support, people of color, right?
Yeah.
Say what you mean. But if you say diversity means everybody. And I'll tell you, I'll never forget the day it hit me more than ever. I went to a diversity, what's the date? I went to this conference in New York, and it's a diversity conference, and I was speaking. And when I got to the conference, they had a stenographer. And so as people were on stage talking, the stenographer was typing it up in real time so you could view it on a large screen. Mm-hmm. That way, if there was anybody in the audience who was hard of hearing, they could keep up with the conversation in real time. Mm-hmm. It was the first conference I ever went to that did that. And that was the first time I stopped and like, well, if you're hard of hearing, you go to a conference, you're stuck. Mm-hmm. If you're really about diversity, that means everybody, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about diversity, that's what we should be talking about. If you're talking about something else, just say what you mean. Don't call out other terms to fit your benefit in those moments.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for clarifying terms for me. And I think this is a good way to even pivot into the conversation. Since this is the Untold Stories series by Allraise, I want us to start with some stuff that is unspoken, untold about yourself that we really can't find on Twitter or even in our different networking groups. And so for me, thinking about that concept of diversity and who's around you and who your affinity group is, I want to start with you at the very, beginning of life. What did life look like for you growing up? I know certainly you have a degree in computer science, but were there people around you that exposed you to the world of venture capital, to technology? Was your world homogenous in a sense? Was it just all Black people that had nothing to do with tech, or people that didn't have differing opinions or ideas? So that's part one of the question. And then part two, what made you, based off of that upbringing, think that you can show up in this arena and be effective?
So yes, I grew up in Baltimore around a bunch of Black people who didn't know anything about tech or didn't have anything to do with tech. My real push in the engineering direction was actually a teacher I had in 6th grade, a gentleman by the name of Mr. Davis, who, looking back on it, was a software engineer. I didn't know it at the time, but like looking back and listening, like remembering the stories he told us, software engineer. But keep in mind, I was in 6th grade in 1997,
Okay.
and he had us building robots with Legos, right? And so like that began me going in the direction of engineering. So the high school I chose, I picked that high school because it had a pre-engineering magnet program. And so again, at my high school, I was on the football team and I was on the track team. I was also a founding member of our engineering club and robotics club, right?
All of this Legos.
Yes. Like Mr. Davis and the Legos. And like he was my teacher from 6th grade all the way through 8th. And so like by the time I was in 8th grade, I was doing like robotics competitions and things, right? Like it's the world, this is the direction I'm headed in. But like when I came home, my dad was ex-military, he was a postal worker, my mom was a bank teller. Their friends were people they grew up with or people they worked with. Like I didn't understand the concept of networks, or I didn't have anybody I could look to who was in the engineering field. I just knew that when I got to college, I was going to get a degree to either to work on robots. And I figured if I worked on robots, I could make a lot of money. Which is also the funny thing. Which is the funny thing, like how I came to computer science. When I got to Morgan State, where I went to school, I said, I want to work on robots, but I don't know anything about majors. They're like, oh, computer science, they have a robotics club. That was a lie. They didn't. They used to in like the 80s. They didn't anymore. But when I showed up, I took my first computer science course, it came to me pretty easy. And then I looked up how much computer science is made, and I was like, oh, this is my major. So that's how I came to this, right? What made me believe I could show up and do this? Nothing. I still don't know if I still struggle with that from time to time, right? Like imposter syndrome is real. What it was when I got my internship working for the government when I was in college, it was the student program. And within the student program, I'm gonna be really real with y'all, so bear with me, folks. But within the student program, there's like 300 students, another 300, like 30 of us were Black. So all the Black kids hung together, right? But to be part of the program, you had to be either an electrical engineering major or a computer science major. So in my early 20s, my group of friends who I would hang out with and party with and go to clubs in DC with were these really highly educated young Black people who either went to HBCUs or Ivy Leagues, because that's the only place where the government sources Black people from, right? And one of those friends happened to be a dude by the name of Patrick Jackson. And Patrick was obsessed with becoming the Black Mark Zuckerberg, right? Like the iPhone comes out in 2007. He makes his first iPhone app in 2008, right? Like this is one of my close buddies. And so I think it's in 2009 when he quits his job and moves to California. We all like, what's going on? What you doing? And he's like, yeah, I'm building stuff that can make money while I sleep. This is what you do. And I'm like, well, if he can do that, we can do that too. And so like a group of my friends all decided we were going to build tech products.
And what year was this?
This is in 2009.
Okay.
2009. So like, as we started building these products, when I built my first company, we didn't think of it as a company. We didn't realize we were building a company. We thought we were building a website that people would use and we could make money and maybe quit our jobs with it. Like, we had no concept of what we were actually doing at the time when we got started. So what gave me the belief that I could do this? Blind ignorance.
You know what? That's honest though. And I think the beauty of stating it that way is that in ignorance, sometimes you are so protected because you don't know what you don't know. I feel like just even in my career and my journey as well, like running into people who have been in a field for a long time. And so they've seen all of the failure around them, but that ends up being the one thing that keeps them from moving forward with that great idea. And they very well may have the skill set, the network, whomever, to really bring whatever that thought or that idea is to life. But unfortunately, when you know too much, you almost don't even want to move in that direction and you end up canceling yourself out. So thank you so much for being just very transparent around what that looked like for you. My next question for you is around, you know, and I think you've mentioned it a couple of times now in terms of being kind of a repeat founder. And now I know that you're a VC, but was there anything that you learned those first two companies that you built, or those websites that you built where you didn't really know what you were doing, that you think make you the ideal VC for underserved or underrepresented founders right now?
The one thing, well, I mean, there's things that you gain having run a company that you can support others with. But I think specifically when it comes to underrepresented founders, it's the patience and empathy to recognize that a founder may not have all the jargon. They might not know all the ins and outs, right? They may not have the perfect pitch deck. They may be too honest, right? That is the thing that comes up too, especially when they're pitching.
Yeah.
And to see beyond that and just evaluate them for the business they're building. I can do that because I know what it was like to be them, right? And that's the one advantage that I have. Now, you know, having a network and being able to talk through business strategy, like, that's helpful, but like, you can find that a lot of places. You know, having somebody that can give you the space and the grace to make mistakes and not be perfect and still have a real conversation about your business, I think is what helps set me apart. And I hope that one day that is no longer a thing that sets me apart, but that becomes the standard.
You know, I think that that's so true. And I want to kind of share a personal story with this one because I can attest to what he's saying. And I'm going to add on my own flavor just as a founder at the tail end of this. But maybe 6-7 months ago, I discovered the world of Twitter. And I, you know, just been doing research as a founder. I'm like, you know, I need to connect with more VCs. Like, I need to find out, you know, what it is that they're interested in. A good friend was just like, you know, all of the VCs are on Twitter. They will tell you what they're looking for in your, you know, in their feed. You just need to follow them long enough. And so after finding Mac's profile, I eventually worked up the nerve to slide into the DMs and start asking questions like, how do I, you know, send you my pitch deck? I was very like, just even though I, you know, I have a lot of career success and experience, I didn't know what I was doing. Not really. I've just taken a leap of faith. Like, I was told based on an article I read on Forbes that I'm supposed to, you know, do A, B, C, D. And so eventually this leads to a response from him. He tells me to contact him and to send him my pitch deck, which coincidentally was for a completely different project that I'm actually working on right now. And so we get into this pitch call. And I had already sent him a Loom link in advance of the conversation. And the conversation quickly, I don't want to say it goes downhill, but it got intense because me as a first-time founder, there was just stuff that I didn't know. And him, just being Mac, was kind of, he was leaning into me a little bit like, well, why this? And are you really passionate about this idea? And if you're not that passionate, why are you pursuing it? And if you're not going to be passionate, why should I invest in it? Because if it's just something that you think is a good idea and there's nothing that's going to keep you up at night working on solving this plan or this problem, then what does that say to an investor? How else do you spend your time? And so it was like a series of like spitfire questions, like back to back to back to back. And so I listened to that feedback, and admittedly at the end of that conversation, I felt a little deflated, and I was like, this is like, I can't believe this happened, and it's kind of by stark contrast, very different than some of the other VC calls that I had had, because as other founders can attest, usually they just say, hey, let's stay in touch, put me on your update list or whatever. And so they don't actually give you the feedback, right? And so for me, that has actually been where we started our relationship, before he became the advisor of my company now. And so I want to use that story to kind of segue into this next section around founder market fit, and then what that working relationship should look like when you are selecting advisors. Now, I kind of consider myself very privileged and a little spoiled, because I know that I can text Mac at any time of day or night and say, hey, here are my problems. I need some guidance. I got this response from this person. Do you know them? How do I respond? How do I navigate? But that's not always the case. And so, Mac, I would love to hear from you in your own words, me aside, what should founders be looking for in that founder, mentor, advisor fit? In addition to that, when you're even evaluating a potential founder to bring under your wing, just like you challenged me to think through some really serious questions around whether or not I was the best founder for that particular idea. What are some things that you can pass on to founders to help navigate both making sure that they're the right person, communicating and conveying that, and selecting the advisor to help guide them through the right idea?
So I'll start with the advisor piece, right? You want to pick an advisor that you can be truly open and honest with, somebody you can trust. Like, it's got to start there, right? Like, these relationships, even though they're business relationships, we're all human, right? And so you want somebody who's going to care about you as a human and care about your business, or who you trust is always going to give you advice in the best interest of you and your business, right? And since we're here for All Raise, that can become difficult for women when building these relationships with men, right? Like, let's be honest about it, right? We've heard some of the terrible stories out there, right? Like, that stuff exists. And so what that means is you need to pay attention to, as you're building that relationship, to whatever red flags pop up. Every little red flag is not a little red flag. Every little red flag is a red flag and something to be paid attention to. Right. And if there is ever a moment where you feel uncomfortable, or you feel like something's going in a direction you do not like, you need to speak up and bring it up immediately. And if it is not met with the right type of response to make you feel comfortable about it, you need to step away. Right. Because those things can become toxic, and they may try to threaten you. They may try to say, well, I'm not that terrible person. What are you talking about? Yeah. Still step away. And if you need help doing it, hit me up on Twitter. Right? Like, hit me up. Let me connect you with other people. Like, hit up the folks at All Raise, because there is a community of women who will get behind you and support you, right? You do not need to stay in a situation where somebody who may call themselves an advisor or angel investor or whatever makes you feel uncomfortable, right? And you address it up front, and if they do not respond properly, you get out. I'll say that. And so you need to be able to have that open, honest, real relationship to talk through things. And then you want somebody, it helps if they're strategic and they know your industry well, right? So that they can help you maneuver in your industry and maybe even make introductions and such. But it could just be somebody who's a generalist. Like, I'm a generalist. I don't know every industry inside and out. But there's things I can help with. There's directions I can help with. And you want to make sure that it's something that fits right with you and what you're building for your company. When it comes to deciding if you're the right founder for a company, every founder's got to decide that for themselves, right? And every founder has this like little voice in the back of their head that tells them they're smarter than everybody else, which is why they figured out the solution for the problem that nobody else has figured out, right? You gotta believe it, you gotta listen to it, right? Like that little voice in the back of your head, like, you can do this. It's gotta be there. It's gotta be meaningful, because building a company is just really freaking hard. It's really hard. There's going to be so many ups and downs along the way, where if you're not building something you truly believe in or you're truly passionate about, man, when you have those days where you feel beaten down and you're like, yo, I don't have a life anymore. My friends don't talk to me anymore. You know, I've missed the last 3 baseball games my son had. What am I doing here? When you get to that moment, if this is not something you're truly passionate about, it's real easy to walk away. It's like, I don't need this. But when you're really passionate and you're going through those hard things, you stop and remember why you're building what you're building. And if it truly means that much to you, nothing's going to stop you, right? Until like you run out of money and you just need to stop. Like that happens too, right? But generally speaking, you're going to put your all into it. And so if you're going to build a company, you want to be building something that you can put your all into. And if you don't feel that way, you might want to reevaluate things.
Yeah. Something you just touched on, you know, and I think is a good segue to the next couple of questions that I have, is around money and using yours and leveraging it to push product forward. So let's say you finally come up with a plan, you finally come up with something that you think is going to make money. But you know, and I'm just going to speak from my own case, like I don't have friends and family to do a friends and family round. So it was like, I had to bootstrap on my own. I think some other viable options, you know, you can do pitch competitions, you can find an angel investor, you can crowdsource monies for your company and whatnot. But when it comes to securing that money and then spending it to try to keep something afloat, what advice do you have for first-time founders, like how to know, you know, how much spending is too much? You know, I can personally attest that every time I want to spend money, Mac is like, do not spend money on that. And I'm like, how am I supposed to, you know, I'll give an example. I'm like, I wanted to spend money on getting letterheads. And he's just like, you don't need letterheads. I'm like, well, how am I supposed to get traction if I don't have letterheads? Like, I need to be taken seriously, and nobody's going to take me seriously unless I have this laundry list of things that businesses, you know, the top tier businesses that you see where they're already drinking champagne and taking the whole company out, you know, to Paris or something like that. The thought is like, you have to kind of keep up that image, you know, on behalf of your brand. So Mac, when it comes to telling founders how to navigate around spending money, running lean, and doing what's in the best interest of the company, what pieces of advice can you offer there?
I would say you got to learn to be super scrappy, right? Because you only have so much money. And raising capital is super hard, and most people are never going to raise capital, right? My first company was acquired by a Fortune 100 company, and we were never able to raise a dime. It was a truly bootstrap company. But it wasn't bootstrapped because I wanted it to be. It was bootstrapped because I couldn't raise capital, right? Like I couldn't get investors. So like it just was what it was. And, you know, even for my first company, we spent our first year and a half just building with nothing, right? We ain't having customers or anything. We were just writing tons of code every night.
Yeah.
And then we decided like, yo, we don't have any customers. And we're like, well, we got to do some marketing. Well, we don't know how to do marketing. Well, let's go get a marketer. Well, we ain't got no money. Well, we should find an investor. Cool. Let's figure out how to do that. That was like literally the conversation that began this entire journey for me, right? And really what it is very often, especially at the early stages, founders try to use money to solve problems they haven't figured out how to solve. Mm-hmm. And because you haven't figured out how to solve it, you tend to just want to throw money at it. But that's not a solution either. Because if you put the money in the wrong things, you just end up blowing it. And you only got so much money to use at this point. And so really you got to learn to be as scrappy as you can and think through like that whole MVP, minimum viable product, right? It's so important because like, what's the smallest, cheapest thing I can build to see if I can get people to use this or to pay for this? Right. And it's like, okay, well, how do I find people? You got to figure that out. You know, the way we got our first couple hundred customers was I would go on Twitter and search for people talking about their birthday every day. Like I did that for months, and that's how we got our first couple hundred customers. I was just cold tweeting people, like, "Hey, happy about your birthday. You should tell people to give your money on our website." Like I was like, that's what I did, right? Why? Because we need to get customers. We couldn't get money, and the fact that we couldn't get money, I can use that as an excuse to let my company fail. I can't say this company failed because no investor would invest in me. Well, like raising money from investors is not the goal. Building a good company is. So how do you do that? Let's start there. And so thinking through those things can be tough. It can be hard. It can be uncomfortable. You can get upset when you read all the TechCrunch articles, all these other people raising money and don't look like you. Like, what the hell? I'm doing all this work and all these other people get money. None of that matters. What matters is what you're going to do to build your company. Right? And you can't use what's going on, what everybody else is doing to justify anything. Like, you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to build a company, you want to get $1 billion, go put in the work, right? And that's hard. And it can be a struggle, and sometimes you don't know where to put in the work, but you know, if you got that good advisor, they can help push you in the right direction. When you start to have crazy ideas like spending money on a letterhead or on a photo shoot, you know, you just have them guide you away. Like,
yes, I needed a photo shoot. Y'all not gonna have me in a turtleneck up to my eyelids with no makeup on and a white background, headshot floating around on Google Images.
I'm just saying there are certain things that go towards customer and revenue growth, and there are certain things that just go to making you feel good.
That's true.
Customer and revenue growth is more important than you feeling good.
Yeah. But those pictures, though, I'm playing. I'm saying this is jest.
I
know. One of the things, you know, that you just kind of touched on is around, you know, you had this really unique customer acquisition strategy. You use Twitter. I mean, obviously, we know that great things come from Twitter. It's where all of the magic happens. But outside of Twitter, what are some, you know, methods that you're seeing that are emerging trends in strategic customer acquisition that are kind of outside of the box that you've been, you know, hearing in some of your most recent sessions with different founder pitches?
So two trends that we're seeing in customer acquisition. So social media has always been good for viral customer acquisition, but right now the social media platform of choice is TikTok. Like, we saw TikTok take a company from 3,000 users to 200,000 users in 3 days, right? Like, that happens. And so, you know, if you're thinking around viralness, I mean, Twitter and Instagram still work, but TikTok's the new king. And it's a consistency thing. You just gotta put out a bunch of content and get your users to put out content, because you never know which one's going to hit. It's just kind of how the viral stuff works. And then the other one is something that I'm coining as community-based marketing, where we're seeing companies create their own communities, like pre-launch or like very early on, where they have their product, but then they have a separate tool that they may use to kind of curate their community. And the tool that we've seen doing this the best most recently has been Discord, for whatever reason, right? We're seeing more and more people creating communities on Discord to moderate and communicate with their users outside of their product itself. And we're seeing that drive customers to their product and allows their customers to have a stronger affinity for the product because they have this open line of communication with the founders. And so, you know, those are two trends that we're seeing in the customer acquisition stage.
Nice. I've got some questions that I've put together, you know, outside of, you know, the conversation in preparation for today. And I wanted to jump into a few of them because I want to make sure that this is very meaningful and useful to all of the founders who are going to watch it. And so I want to start, you know, a conversation here around what product market fit needs to look like. I want to chat about that journey of, you know, really discovering what a good fit is. So yes, you're building a community, you know, yes, you're, you know, running lean with with your funding or your finances, whatever. But the other really unique angle in terms of finding that growth and that success is whether or not whatever you're building makes sense for that community or for that market. So just to kind of pivot there. And so I think, I'm wanting to know more about the definitions. So in your own words, can you tell me a little bit about how you personally define what product market fit is?
So for me personally, product market fit is something that actually happens much later in the life of a business, right? When I think about product market fit, I don't think about the early stage, because typically the early stages of your company, you have a product and you typically have like a niche community that's using it, right? That's validating that there's a group who really want to use it. But when we talk about product market fit, I think about, and there's a great book on this called Crossing the Chasm, where you go from having a product that is beloved by the smaller niche community and now makes the leap to the mainstream community, right? And making that leap to mainstream is one of the steps where a lot of companies fail at, right? Where you can get this initial community, you can get to your first, let's call it 5 or 8 million in annual revenue, and you're doing good. But to go from, let's call it 5 to 10 million in annual revenue to 50 to 100, two very different things, right? You got to be able to have enough room to grow in the market to be able to get to that. And so when I think about product market fit, it's showing that you're now starting to show signs of like, oh, this is a product that can cross the chasm and really go far. When I think about for an early stage company, though, it's more about, can you get a product out that there's some touch points of like, oh, there's a market. Like, have you figured out that there's a market at all, right? Can you figure out that there's 1,000 people who want to pay you money to do this thing, right? Or can you get 20,000 people to show up to this app every day, right? Show that there's a market that has an appetite for it. And so when it comes to product market fit, that's how I think about it.
So I have a question about that. And it's something that I feel like I have struggled listening to different VCs on Twitter. When they start talking about traction and you're talking about, making sure that you're hitting these numbers and all of that, like, I'm wanting to know, is there some magical number that you need to hit as an early stage company for people to understand that not only is your idea validated, but that there is a market for it and that there's likely to be market growth? I mean, obviously I know this is going to vary by industry type, but I'm wondering if there's a magic number of users, whether it's in an open or closed beta, that investors are looking for, where I'm like, okay, instead of me thinking like, oh, if I just get to 1,000 users, like that's good enough, right? Is there a range or something that, early stage companies need to be looking at when it comes to communicating the strength of whatever their idea or their product is?
More. The answer is always more.
Look,
that
is not helpful. Matt, so here's the thing. I'm trying to take notes, so I need to give me a number.
So here's the thing, right? I can give you a number, and let me clarify. Every investor is going to be different, right? Mm-hmm. And traction is a hard thing to define because every entrepreneur, like, well, you say I need more traction, what's the number? So here's the problem, right? I can give you a number, and I can tell you, Adonica, go out. You get 10,000 users, you're good, right? And you'd be like, cool, I got a goal. The problem is when you're for an early stage founder or any founder, when you're pitching investors, you're not just pitching based on your growth. You're not just pitching based against the competitors in your space. You're pitching against all the other companies I'm going to see over that timeline. So again, like in a given quarter, I'm going to see on the low end 500 companies. Every 3 months, I'm going to see on the low end 500 companies. If I add in my team, we're going to see 750 companies. Of that, we're going to invest in 0 to 6.
Okay.
So out of 750 companies every quarter, we're going to invest in 0 to 6 of them. So you may go out and be like, hey, Mac, I got that 10,000 users. What's good? And I'll be like, that's awesome. But I just met another company 2 weeks ago that got 30,000.
That's shady.
And so then the number I gave you, the number I gave you is valid. It's like, it's worth us having the conversation, right? The more traction you have, the better it is for us to have a conversation. But if I happen to meet another company during that timeline that's got better traction, well, then it just like, and there's no way for me to account for that. right? And so what you want to work on is just growing the best you can, right? Like you want to grow as best you can or as fast as you can to put yourself in the position where you're interesting for venture capital, right? And like a decent benchmark is to be growing by like anything over 20% month over month. You're moving in a decent direction, right? Now, I have a company in my portfolio who's growing by 40% month over month, which is actually like astronomical at the speed he's going. And so he's raised money twice. And both times he's raised money, he closed his round in a day because he was just growing faster than like any other startup we've seen in the last year, right? Yeah. And so that happens, right? And so like, that's why I said more, because his traction is so high, like he can raise money like it's nothing, right? Because he's growing so fast, right? And so, and the speed in which you're growing is important because from a venture standpoint, from a venture capital standpoint, I want to invest in a company that has the potential to be worth $1 billion or more.
So, if they have the growth, still pre-revenue, is that valid too? Or are you talking about you want to see more, but that more being the number of users plus some type of revenue stream as well, if you're going to make that decision? Does it matter? Does it matter if you're pre-revenue as long as you have strong growth?
It depends on the firm and depends on the investor. But I would say, if you can get 30 to 50,000 users in like 3 months, you're growing pretty fast. You probably get some interest, right?
Yeah.
If you're growing by like 100 users a week, you're growing. It may not be that fast, but you're working in the right direction, right? So if somebody says you need more traction, well, at least you got the starting points, and like now you got to figure out for the product you're building and what little resources you have, what knobs can you turn to kind of beef that traction up over time, right? If it's a B2B company, somebody just put in chat, if it's a B2B company, it could be that you have 3 pilots, but those 3 pilots have LOIs that are worth, let's call it 1.5 million, right? I looked at a company yesterday that is pre-product, pre-revenue, but has signed LOIs worth $600 million. Now, LOIs don't really mean anything in the long run because anybody can turn away from them, but $600 million worth of LOIs might get you some money, right? So like, it's all depends on the industry and the ratio and everything. But at the end of the day, how much traction is enough? Just more. The more you have, the better position you're in.
See,
it's a hard answer to take. Like, I just be real with you.
You guys wonder, like, with founders, it's kind of like, we're staying up round the clock trying to figure out, how much, when they're talking about, oh, we need to get traction. Okay, we're going to get it. And then we get it and we're like, okay, is this when you can tell an investor, do you follow up and say, oh, I've got traction now? And then based off of your responses is like, well, if it's always more, there has to be something that tips the scales and takes a company or a product from something that's like, oh, it's nice they have traction. Oh, it's nice they've got a good team. Oh, it's nice it's a validated idea. To here's a check, right? And so are there 3 things that you're looking for specifically that gets a founder from, you're a wonderful person, I genuinely like you, want to see you do well in life, I appreciate where you're coming from, versus I'm willing to put a check behind you, invest in your background, your expertise, your ability to deliver on this particular product? What are those 3 things?
It's different for every company and every industry. So like, it's not just 3 things I give you. I give you an example of like, there's a fintech company in Latin America, really interesting woman-led company we're taking a look at. She worked at another fintech company that worked in emerging markets that was doing well. And they currently have a wait list of over 100,000 users. There's only been 2 other fintech companies that have publicly said that they've done the same thing, and both of those unicorns. So, pre-product, pre-revenue, but everything's pointing in the right direction. So that's really interesting. And to have 100,000 users in your wait list is just not something you see every day. But then to the point of more, there was a situation that we had at RareBreed where we had these 3 companies we were looking at, and they were really interesting, and we picked one. But then a day, we picked one internally, but we were still going through some paperwork and stuff. The day after we picked them, another one of the companies came back to us and had closed a really large deal that like almost tripled their revenue. I was like, oh, that's interesting. We're like, nah, we picked the other one. Then the third company that that was in that group that we passed on came back like, hey, we're getting ready to raise a round. By the way, this gigantic conglomerate that's a strategic is going to lead our investment round. Like we're talking about like a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate is going to lead their seed round. Something I had never seen before. And it's strategic that could like personally make them millionaires. Like, well, that's interesting. Well, we need to talk to that strategic. So now we're going to put everything else on hold because we got to talk to that strategic. And that might be the tipping point.
Yeah.
And then a day later, we met with another company that had gotten like 40,000 users in their first like month and a half of being live. And we ended up picking that one. And so the company we ended up picking was completely separate of the three we were originally looking at. Mm-hmm. Just because that's just the nature of the deal flow and companies coming in. Yeah. And like, was it tough for us to make that decision? Yeah, it was terrible. But we only have so much capital. We can only invest in so many companies. And as VCs, we have to make hard decisions, right? Like I'm going to pass on far more companies that I like than I am going to invest in them just by the nature of the industry, all right? And so can I give you any hard and fast numbers? No, I wish I could. And I know it's hard, but also got to remember, I've been there too.
That's very true. I know that we're, running out of time here. So I do want to make sure I cover some other areas of interest. And so when we're talking about traction, I think, yes, it's great when you're talking about, oh, we got 40,000, new users in the last week and a half. Wonderful, that's great. But in order to support those types of numbers, clearly you're either going to need to expand a team, you're going to have to reorganize who's doing what, because if you're just a team of 1, 2, 3 people to go from maybe, a couple of hundred, a couple thousand users to jump that exponentially higher that far, within just a short amount of time, you're going to have to hire and scale, fairly quickly. Do you have any pieces of advice on how to make those hires? Should it be people that are already in your network and that you can just give equity to instead of paying because you don't know if you're going to be able to sustain that growth? Do you make a long-term decision and say, oh, we already have 40,000, so we might as well just go ahead and scale up right now? What does that look like from a hiring standpoint? And when a founder finds themselves in that position where they get this really viral growth and the traction that they're looking for, and yet they don't have the team, what should they be doing next?
You want to make sure you don't have the team. Don't just jump to those conclusions, right? If you look at Instagram got acquired for $1 billion with like a 9-person team, right? Like you want to don't jump into it just because you got some money. Like it's got to be strategic, it's got to make sense. Once you start hiring, I would say hire slow, fire fast. I'm sure everybody's heard that before, but as an early stage company, you do not have time to have the position where I don't know if it's going to work out. We're having some issues with this engineer, but let's give him a chance. We want to get you don't have time to give people a chance, right? Because your runway is only but so long, right? Like payroll becomes your biggest expense real quick. Payroll and marketing, like those are 2 things your money's going to go to. Yeah. And so you're better off letting go of somebody who's not a right fit for your company or not being able to execute, that you are trying to hold on to and trying to be nice, which is a really hard thing to do, right? Like if you haven't been in the position to fire people before, it can be tough to fire people, right? It can hurt, but you got to do what you got to do is right for your business. And you want to find the best people, right? And so can you use your network? Sure. If you've gotten some money from your investors, use their network. If you need to go hire a good, hiring firm, go do that. But you want to find yourself the best people you can, because as an early stage company, you ain't got time to be helping people. You don't have time to be teaching people. You don't have time to be hand-holding people, which is why it can be hard for early stage companies to get interns. You'd be like, I'm gonna get interns to take care of this. And then you recognize, oh, I gotta hold their hand. I gotta tell them how to do this. I gotta double check the work. You don't have time for that. You need somebody sit here, do this, I can walk away and know everything's not going to blow up, right? Like that's what you need. And so you want to be thinking about that. And sometimes that might mean giving up a little bit of equity, paying a little bit more. For all you, first-time founders who haven't started hiring yet, here's a big thing for you. Very often the C-level executives at a startup are not the highest paid people in a startup. Just going to let you know now. Be okay paying people more than you pay yourself. Like, it's a weird thing, but your value is tied up in the equity in the business, not in your salary, right? You're building this business to get the big payout at the end. Those employees don't get to have that. So if they make more to you right now, that's part of the process to get the right people. So you ain't got a handhold them in the process and make sure you can move the way you want to move. That's what it is. But, do not, if you got to fire some people and let some people go, like it may not feel okay, but got to do it.
Mm-hmm. So I've seen this, and I thought what you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, it's very true, but I'd have to say as a woman, the experience is a little different. And so you mentioned a few minutes ago, it's better to hire slow, fire fast. I have seen in a number of my, women's founder groups, a couple of things, particularly for those of us, like I'm technically non-technical. You go and you let go of somebody and then they go and badmouth your company. I've also heard of women, you get sued or you get blackballed or blacklisted because you fired people fast and maybe they didn't understand why they were fired, or just sometimes they just want to, throw salt in your company and its, growth strategy and your ability to get money and all of that. How do you deal with making those tough decisions and then having to ride out the consequences? I know you can't technically speak to being a woman founder and dealing with this. I don't know what how it works with men, but I will say that I've seen a significant number of women comment in my groups around trying to save your reputation and not be called all types of names for making those hard line decisions that really are in the best interest of the company.
More often than not, when those things happen, they're not long lasting. They feel much worse in the moment than they actually are. This is actually a really common thing when it comes to co-founders. Co-founder divorce is like a very normal thing. The amount of calls I've gotten from people like, I got to get rid of my co-founder. This is so horrible. What am I going to do? It's okay. I'm sorry. Like, here's a game plan. This is what we're going to do. These are the things you need to do. And then I'll get a call. My co-founder just called all my investors and told them how terrible I was. Like, it's okay. Here's the game plan. This is what you do. This is the conversation you have. If you need me to go in the conversation with you, I can't. Like, I've seen it enough where, like, it ain't a big deal for me. But for you as a founder, like, it feels like the most important thing in the world, right? And so it's almost like being in high school again. When that kid in the lunchroom, threw food at you, and now everybody at school knows you as the girl who had like a pie thrown at her, and like it's the worst thing ever happened, and your world's going to end. It's like, no, it's just a moment. It feels bad. People want to talk about it for a week, and then somehow something will happen to somebody else, and everybody will be on that for a week, right? Like it's kind of the nature of it. But go ahead.
I was going to say, do VCs take that seriously though? So let's say you do have a co-founder divorce and then that one person goes and runs to all of the investors or potential investors. Do they take that seriously? Or, I know that you're kind of cool as a cucumber about it, but if they are receiving feedback from somebody who's jumping ship on the company or who's been out, whatever it is that something that they make actionable in, just your experience, actionable decisions off of, or do they just know it's kind of name of the game and they tend to ride it out until whatever decisions have been made as well?
It depends on why the person's leaving, right? Like, we know it's the name of the game, but if somebody comes to me like, hey, I gotta leave because my co-founder's doing XYZ, they're an unethical person, so I'm out. Okay, my ears are gonna perk up, right? And I'm gonna have a conversation, may do some due diligence. Very often it's just somebody who's disgruntled and like, it's not a big deal, right? But if they point me in the direction of something where it's real, like, hey, somebody's misappropriating funds, and I'm on the board, I'm like, hey, why don't you send me your financials? I haven't seen them, next board meeting's not for another month or so. I just want to get a head start on it. Mm-hmm. And if stuff don't add up, or if I see stuff missing, well, like, that's just me being prudent though, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, when you got kids, right? You got multiple kids, or like your kids are playing with their friends, and something happens, and somebody runs like, Bobby pushed me. Bobby, did you push him? We were playing the game. I ran to it too hard. Did you say sorry? No. Go say sorry. Right? Like, was it malicious? Maybe not. But the kids, their first inkling to come to mom and dad. Like, what happened? It's very often. Sorry, I have a house full of y'all. One of the few people in America still has a house full.
We're right at time, and so I want to make sure that we get just one last question in, and we end on a high note with perhaps one thing that all founders can do now to be relevant or forward thinking for 6 months from now. Is there any trend that you're seeing, maybe just a couple of handfuls of people that are coming to you that isn't widely known, isn't widely being reported on, that people should be doing next?
I mean, the biggest trend is we're at a moment in time where folks are really trying to be intentional around the idea of investing in underrepresented founders. And I don't know how long it's going to last. And we're seeing it actually start to slow down already. And so I tell you, over the next 6 months.
That was fast. Okay.
All I would say is over the next 6 months, if you're in a position to take advantage of it, if I can, I don't know how long this is going to last. And, the market seems kind of weird because like venture capital is very much tied to capital markets. So like if you start to see stock markets start to plummet, venture capital is going to get real tight. So, whenever that happens, it's going to happen at some point. Market has cycles. It's just how it is. So I would say over the next 6 months, try to take advantage of it. And I would tell you, people are talking about it more and more, but I don't know how mainstream it is yet. That community aspect, building a product that has a community tied to it, is something that people are really, really, really paying attention to.
Okay.
And, crypto's still in its infancy, but like there's a lot happening in crypto and there's a lot happening with the metaverse. If you don't know what the metaverse is, go Google it. It's a thing. It's a big thing. And it's going to build a whole lot of new industries. Like literally, the metaverse is going to create whole new industries.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. I'm just pleased to have had this conversation with you, and we got through it without going on anything too touchy. I appreciate your time today. Thank you to everybody who joined us, and I'm going to turn it over to the folks at AllRaise.
Yes, thank you, Adonica. Thank you, McKeever. This was amazing. Just the gems that were dropped. Cannot thank you enough for your time and your knowledge sharing, I think, on both sides, founder perspective, Mac, having you on the VC side now. And for everyone on the call, as always, we love your feedback. I got you a QR code, making it as simple as possible. Just pull out the phone, click, and 2 minutes. Give us your feedback. We'd really love to hear what you think and what we can do to continue these conversations. And with that, thank you again to both of you. Such a pleasure to get to meet you behind stage and then see you in action. So many things learned. So thank you again, and happy Friday Eve. We're almost there. We're almost there.
Thank you for having me. This was a fun one. And thank you, Adonica, for moderating. I really appreciate it.
Thank you both for having me as well.
Of course, of course. Have a good one, everyone. And thank you.
Everybody.